So, hi, Bobby Rodrigo here with the Coffee Party and Tax Revolution Institute, and I take liberty with my coffee with Dr. Jill Stein. Of course, you know I'm always happy to have you around me. I know I adore you, and I wanted a chance. We both were at the Left Forum this past weekend, and we're in New York City. And well, how was your experience at Left Forum? I know you were involved in 3 or 4. They kind of used you up there, didn't they? They didn't use you up, but they had you talking about a lot of things, didn't they?
Yeah, and it was great, and the workshops were wonderful. And what was like really, a game changer for me here was I wasn't here, but I heard that at the opening plenary, I don't know if you were part of that, but at the opening plenary, Medea Benjamin posed the question to the audience.
Code Pink.
Yeah, she said, so, Bernie Sanders is being, essentially neutralized, eliminated, disappeared by the Democratic Party. So are people here going to vote for Hillary Clinton? Raise your hand if you're going to vote for Hillary Clinton. And I think no hands went up. And then it was raise your hand if you're going to vote for Donald Trump. And I think 2 hands went up. And then it was now raise your hand if you're going to vote for Jill Stein. And then she says, oh, wow, because pretty much the whole room raised their hands. So it was really exciting to see in this conference, which has typically been a rallying place for the progressive Democrats,
right,
for whatever that term means,
right,
as people who've essentially argued to stay inside the system. They've really now had the wake-up moment of their lives and have seen why it is that it really requires independent politics to move us forward. And in a nutshell, you cannot have a revolutionary campaign inside of a counter-revolutionary party. So I think that that understanding has kind of raised its, the head of reality here. So it's really exciting.
You and I met actually on ballot access issues as working outside the party. That's one of the reasons why we made the connection that we did, in my opinion. And I want you to talk a little bit more about that, because it is so important that we keep people educated on how the 2-party system, the duopoly, tries and keep both people in and try to keep the other candidates out. Exactly. And in separate messages. Talk a little bit about that.
Yes, in so many ways, we say that we have a democracy, we justify our wars overseas because we're bringing democracy, to the world. But what does it look like here? Actually, we have a system which has many strategies for silencing political opposition. And that's basically what this game is about. It's silencing voters, it's denying the right to vote, it's making voting inconvenient and inaccessible, and outright disenfranchising many voters. But in addition to that, we don't allow voters to have real choices. We limit them, not we, but the political establishment limits those choices to the powers that be, which are throwing everybody under the bus. And one of the ways they do that is by keeping political challengers, opposition voices, off of the ballot, by creating crazy rules. So there are really complicated rules and 50 different sets of them. So, it requires a major effort just to keep track of what are the rules in the different states and how do they work and what are the deadlines. And you have to collect a lot of signatures. So, for example, in Georgia, which has been one of the most oppressive states,
right,
and we just challenged them in court and got the requirement brought down from 50,000 signatures to like 7,000. So suddenly we have the prospect of giving Georgia voters a real choice, because right now they have only corporate choices. And the money in politics is another way that we really restrain choice, so that the political parties are funded by the same big money interests, that is predatory banks and fossil fuel giants and war profiteers and health insurance predators. This is who controls the party. So even if you get a progressive candidate who can actually speak to the needs of the people, that candidate will be systematically wiped out. What's happening to Bernie Sanders was waiting to happen. This was the ambush of 2016, like the Dean Scream many years ago. Concocted PR campaign.
You mentioned the Bernie Sanders thing, and that's important. One of the aspects, and I know you saw this and you saw it coming, we've all talked about this, but one of the ways that's been highlighted for today's voters that they missed is the superdelegate response to the Bernie wins. which is a glaring example. As a matter of fact, I guess Debbie Wasserman Schultz recently was talking about how they were going to change that. Well, obviously you shouldn't have in the first place, but it's interesting here because there's an opportunity from the standpoint of your party. I mean, we have organizations that I'm involved with are close to your party. They're also close to the Libertarian Party, the Justice Party, all these alternatives, that identify. You mentioned Georgia. The Libertarian Party is working just as hard as the Green Party in Georgia. So I'm seeing the attempts. That has to be almost exhilarating to see, though disappointing in the process, because people are seeing how really corrupt it is. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're talking about winning a state and not winning the delegates. How preposterous is that?
Exactly, and this is why the system was created, in order to build a firewall against grassroots politics. Mm-hmm. And all you have to do is look at the history on this, because where did the superdelegates come from? They were created by a Democratic Party committee after a grassroots candidate won the Democratic nomination in 1972, and that was George McGovern, right, who won as a peace candidate in a grassroots campaign. So, and at that point the party basically abandoned him, and he had maybe the biggest loss in history. And so the party said, well, we can't let this happen again. We need to be sure that the grassroots can't take over our party apparatus. And they created superdelegates, which are basically party insiders. Sometimes they are elected officials, but they're also lobbyists. Right. So they are not people with any real democratic authority. They are not representative. They are strictly the power structure and the money behind the Democratic Party. And, so once the Democratic Party created this superdelegate rule, and they constitute something like 30% of the net needed delegates for a candidate to win. So it is a huge margin of safety. It means that Hillary Clinton could actually lose the committed delegate vote and still get it from the superdelegates, which is outrageous. And the argument that Bernie can go in there and persuade them because he's doing better in the polls, unfortunately, that's not why they exist. They don't exist in order to be responsive to the electorate. They exist in order to stay the course for the corporate power behind the Democratic Party, which rules the day. Yeah,
and it's been amazing that we've been listening to some of these superdelegates, because once the situation came up, New Hampshire was pretty much where it started. Mm-hmm. A huge victory in numbers for Bernie Sanders, and yet they came out of New Hampshire with the same amount of delegates. Mm-hmm. And everybody said, wait a minute, what's going on here? So there were some quotes from some of the superdelegates that said, doesn't matter what they do, I'm still going to vote for Hillary regardless. Which is basically, okay, I'm going to slap you in your face no matter what you do. And then you have voters who say, okay, why do I need to go to the polls then? Yeah, and here you have that vicious cycle again. And, yes, and they know this. It's crazy. Yes. You mentioned the voting situation. Another thing that's happened again, here is 2016, are the long lines. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to believe this is just random stuff going on. Was it Colorado, I think, where Arizona, where they had they cut the number of polling stations by 2/3? I mean,
I'm not sure. I know New York had an issue at cutting them as well. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was one of the western states,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't remember which one, but it was a primary conducted about 2 months ago, where they drastically closed the number of polls, and people were standing in line. So who did that impact the most? Elders in particular, who couldn't stand there, for 5 and 6 hours, which is what people had to do in order to vote.
Right.
So this is really this is voter suppression.
Well, certainly, and you don't find out what the true numbers are. And then on the Democratic side, you have the superdelegates that are going to vote the way they do for the establishment anyway. So now you don't even have the other side of it to show if there was if there's an argument, because right, people aren't getting a chance to
That's
vote.
Right. And then there were tens of thousands of voters in Brooklyn, I think, who just disappeared from the
100,000, and the controller actually, they put an investigation on it. That was crazy.
Right.
And this is New York again.
I know. This is Democratic territory.
It's Democratic territory, yes, right? And that's my response to that. Sure.
Yes.
When you see it. I mean, obviously you see it from both sides. We know what the Republican Party does, but their rules when Ron Paul was running last time, the rule changes that they made, obviously, they have to deal with now, and it's coming back to bite them. Mm-hmm. One of the thoughts that are being talked about because of the Sanders campaign and the new voters that are being brought in is that let's say, for example, Hillary does win the general election. If she wins, the Democratic Party wins the general election, that it's going to cause even more of a rift in the Democratic Party. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, huge. I mean, I think this election has really revealed the monster behind the mask. You know, the mask has come off of both parties right now.
Sure.
So the Republican Party, you know, suddenly its elites are recognized as being very hostile to the base of voters. And the elites are now, you know, persona non grata, really despised people within their own party. And inside the Democratic Party, we're kind of seeing the same thing. And, you know, it's sort of ironic that the Republicans, who are generally considered more authoritarian, you know, they have less control over their electoral process here than the Democrats, who are really showing the very heavy hand of their authority and corporate control in the way that this whole process is being run, the way the superdelegates are rigged. You know, in this election, it's sort of become common knowledge now to say that, yes, the economy is rigged. And what I think is also being discovered is that the political process is rigged. And we're not going to change the rigged economy until we change the rigged political system. And that's not going to happen from inside those parties that are controlled by the same predatory banks and fossil fuel giants and war profiteers. That is where the money is. And this party, both of them, but the Democrats in particular, the candidates have been on a very short leash for a long time. It's not only the superdelegates and the Super Tuesdays, which also concentrates the contest in a way that it takes a huge amount of resources. And also it takes a political machine. So that's why Hillary's been able to beat back Bernie in so many places. But they control the media. You know, they control all the elected officials, save one or two. You know, how many superdelegates does Bernie have? Not very many. And how many electeds in Congress does he have? Almost none. Right. There's like one senator who supports him. Right. So there is a big machine here which is in control of the process. And this is a wake-up moment because we actually have a huge amount of power. Bernie has demonstrated that. And let me just continue a point I wanted to make before, which is that he's not the only one, a progressive Democrat, which is being axed by the Democratic Party. What happened to Howard Dean, who at the time was a progressive? He's not such a progressive now, sure, but he was. And
superdelegate now.
Is he? I'm not surprised. Yes, and an insurance agent and stuff like that. So he, at the time, was a peace candidate. And he was doing very well in the polls, and they captured a little moment of video where he was making an enthusiastic scream, and they just kind of ran that over and over and made him look like a madman. Yeah. They conducted a purposeful smear campaign against him. They did the same thing against Jesse Jackson when he was running a very powerful progressive campaign on the strength of the civil rights movement. He was really going full storm, had won a dozen or so primaries in the Midwestern states, well, big ones, and they axed him with a similar smear campaign based on his statements he made about Israel, as I understand. So, you know, they did a smear campaign on him to bring him down in the polls. Dennis Kucinich, they wouldn't allow him into the debates to start with because he would not pledge allegiance to the Democratic Party. He wanted to maintain his integrity and his independence. So they wouldn't let him in to start with, and then they redistricted him to basically completely silence his voice and get him out of the business of being an elected congressman. So this is what the party does. What's happening to Bernie was absolutely predictable. The Democratic Party has been waiting in ambush for a moment to launch an attack on him, and they seized the Nevada convention, which was an outrage. I don't know if you have had a chance to review that video.
It was amazing. The video. I don't mean to cut you off, but I want to let you know I did see it, and it is an amazing situation. But it's not the first one I've seen like that in for either party. It's just this is stuff that goes on.
Yes.
But this one, with this election, like you say, it's the teaching. So go on, please.
Well, yeah, I mean, there was sort of a violation of Robert's Rules of Order to start with, and then the chair gavelled through rules changes in a way that was very contrary to the evidence. The yays were not greater than the nays, and she refused to consider objections and said, it was outrageous to watch the extremely defensive way in which she conducted that ruling and threw down the gavel and hightailed it out of town.
And then, of course, they had people who weren't even inside yet. They're doing a lot of
That's
this
right.
without all the people inside.
Right.
I'll tell you a similar story.
But before we leave that, and now Bernie is being vilified
Because of the response of the people that were there.
Because the people were responding with appropriate outrage to the assault on our democratic rights.
Right.
What are people supposed to do? They were asserting the process and the rules for objection, and the process was being completely trashed by the Democratic Party. So it was there for everyone to see.
Bernie's credit too, he backed the people.
He did.
And that too, I was surprised to see that, and that's good because they did come after him.
And the Democratic Party is going after him.
Yeah.
This is their Dean Scream of 2016. This is their effort to vilify him. And for Hillary's decline in the polls, which she should take complete responsibility for, they are trying to turn Bernie's very existence into the cause of Hillary's decline. Hillary's responsible for her own decline,
Yes.
which makes the point. This system is not going to allow change from within. And, Bernie has climbed the mountain, but he's not going to go to the promised land inside of the Democratic Party.
Right.
This is where the handoff has to happen. And we've made the point, that we are here as Plan B for Bernie's supporters who really want to see a rigged political system transformed so that we can transform our rigged economy and make it work for everyday people.
So let's talk about that, because one of the things I always talk to you about when I talk to you is the for me, what I consider the ridiculous facade of, if I vote for Jill Stein and the Green Party, that I wasted my vote.
Yes.
And I put the Republican Party into power. Now we have a situation where you have essentially a revolt inside the Democratic Party to a significant degree, because that's part of what Bernie's been talking about. So certainly his constituents, a good percentage of them, is feeling that way. So the opportunity for a large influx of people to vote for you is there, and we know that the establishment is going to say, if you do that, you're going to put a Republican in power. And you say to that?
I say to that, I will be horrified if Donald Trump wins the election. I will be horrified if Hillary Clinton wins the election. And above all, I am horrified by a political system that can only offer us two lethal, deadly choices and say, that's it, folks. Above all, we have to challenge this political system. And let me just say at the outset here, in the words of Alice Walker, the poet and novelist, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. If you take only the demographic of young people and middle-aged people now as well who are trapped in student loan debt, that is 43 million people right there who have no way out to reclaim their lives. Because in the economy we've got and where it's going, you can't repay that debt. You can hardly pay your rent. The jobs aren't there. And that 43 million people has only one place to put their vote, and that is into my campaign, because I'm the one candidate who will cancel the debt of the students like we did for the crooks on Wall Street. We managed to bail them out who crashed the economy. It's about time we bail out their victims. So if that word gets out, 43 million is a winning plurality of the vote.
Sure.
So I just want to challenge the assumption at the outset that we are powerless. We are only powerless as long as we think we are powerless, as long as we drink the Kool-Aid and accept the propaganda of powerlessness. We are not powerless by any means. And we have to reject this lesser evil and fight for the greater good like our lives depend on it. Because they do. Democracy does not consist of the sum total of what we're against. And in fact, a CNN poll last week showed that the majority of Trump's supporters don't support him, they just oppose Hillary. And the majority of Hillary's supporters don't support her, they just oppose Trump. What is wrong with this system? Democracy needs values, it needs a moral compass. Without that, we are a ship lost at sea in a storm. And that ship is going down. Whether you look at the economy, the next Wall Street crash, the next crash of the economy, which could happen today or tomorrow, and there are actually some very worrisome signs out there that we could talk about later. But we don't have a recovery for everyday people. We are still in an economic emergency. Average wages are barely above poverty. Jobs that have come back are part-time, temporary, extremely insecure. A generation of students is locked in debt. Black lives are on the firing line. Immigrants are waiting for the knock at the door. The Democrats are the party of deportation and night raids. The Republicans may be the party of hate and fear-mongering, but the Democrats are actually doing it. Our wars for oil, are massively expanding and only making us more insecure, costing the average household $75,000 for this last 15 years of war since 9/11. $6 trillion, that's $75,000 that your household, every household, is paying on average for these wars that have created failed states and worse terrorist threats. My point here is that our lives really are at stake with this system, and including the climate crisis. A report was released last week. Actually, this was just a verbal report from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, not a radical administration, a seriously scientific administration that does all the climate science for the country. And they had just received what they described as an oh my God report from the Antarctic, that the meltdown is taking place far faster than anybody thought, and that we can expect 9 feet of sea level rise by approximately 2050. Okay, there are a lot of people out there listening that are going to be around in 2050. I intend to be around in 2050.
I thought that'd be a good idea that I was around, yeah.
Yes, we need you. We cannot afford to lose any of our fearless leaders here. But 950 means where we are sitting right now in Manhattan will be underwater. Right. 9 feet means this. And you know what else? There are a whole lot of nuclear power plants that are located at sea level on the coast. I happen to live not so far from one. So I looked up, what is the elevation of this coastal nuclear power plant? It is 0 degrees, 0 feet. What happens when nuclear power plants get flooded? I think we've seen this before in Fukushima. So the bottom line is, we can't go forward. We would have Fukushimas all up and down the coast here. And so even if your particular neck of the woods isn't flooded, you're going to be living in a very toxic radiological waste site all up and down our coasts. 600 million people is the estimate for those who would be underwater that will be moving. We can't handle 40 million refugees right now from U.S. war and foreign policies and impoverishment and so on. So our lives really are at stake. We cannot go down this path. The 43 million young people who are locked in debt, they cannot go down this path. We have to stand up and reject this system. We have to say no to the lesser evil and yes to the greater good, because the minute we do that, we will discover that we actually have the power, we have the solutions, we have the basic human and community values of the American public, our longing for democracy, our longing for a humane society. We've got that. We've got it all. We need to stand up. This election is the perfect storm for revolutionary change. Let's stand up and make it happen now while we still can. This is this is the Hail Mary moment, It's like, speak now, folks, or forever hold your peace. It's time to stand up. We have the power. We got to use it.
Let's play a little word association. Congress.
What is it? The public says cockroaches.
I like it. I don't know if I'd be that nice. So, from the standpoint of policy, because one of the things I noticed in the election cycle is the candidates talk about things that they don't control. Congress controls a lot of these items.
Yes.
How do you deal with Congress? Give me your assessment of Congress.
So the game plan. The game plan number one is that we, the people, in the free press, as opposed to the other guys. We have a name for the other guys, by the way. We call them the O press. Get it?
I get it.
And the re-press and the de-press. Okay,
Yes.
so we need the real press. That's what you guys are. Thank you very much. Thank all those listeners out there who are listening or watching. I'm not sure what you're doing.
Both.
But, all right, that's really great. So this is where our attention and our support and our dollars need to go, to the real press. Thanks to the real press, thanks to the internet, we got to get the word out. And we start with the fact that 43 million young people, and not so young people, can liberate themselves on November 8th by coming out and checking the green box. Here's why. Not only is that a plurality of the vote, but the president appoints the head of the Federal Reserve, and what does the Federal Reserve decide? They decide who gets a so-called quantitative easing, which is basically a magic trick by which unreal debt is canceled. And so we cancel that debt. But you know what? This happens to be a stimulus package of our dreams, unlike the bailout for Wall Street, which just enabled more reckless gambling with taxpayer dollars. That was not a productivity bailout. Bail out the students and you unleash incredible productivity and creativity and imagination. How is it that we go forward into the 21st century with the mindset of the 20th? We don't. And I'm sorry to say it, but us folks who are over 40 and 50 and 60, we don't see the world so much as it is today. We got a filter. Because as you live through the decades, you get a filter. So this is why social transformation has always relied on the younger generation. So we have essentially shot ourselves in the foot by excommunicating the entire generation and hobbling them in debt. So by freeing them, which will be my first act, if I'm so lucky as to sit into the White House. My first act is to actually liberate a generation of young people, to repatriate them so that they can lead the way forward. Now, what are they going to lead the way forward on? Young people, millennials, are not only the victims of a predatory student loan system, they are victims of a predatory economy, they are victims of a predatory energy policy, which is killing the climate, and they are leading the charge for green energy and a retooling of our economy with a just transition. Who's leading the charge for labor rights, for against sweatshops, for immigrant rights, for Black Lives Matter? All the social justice movements are being led by the younger generation. So number one is to liberate them, because they are our ground troops by which we the people really get represented. And right now, you got to have deep lobbyist pockets to make yourself heard in Congress. Until you overwhelm that with brute force of everyday people. This is how, remember back in 2013, we were going to bomb Syria, because of the weapons of mass destruction. Resistance is futile, We stood up and we challenged that. We had time to organize. When Obama got elected, he put his ground troops on the shelf. He had a grassroots movement that got him elected, but then he betrayed what his real priority was by terminating that grassroots army.
He broke so many campaign promises. It's pretty ridiculous, actually.
Exactly. So there's no way he could have kept that army.
He had a lot of potential. We
will not do that. We will only strengthen our grassroots army. And that's how we will move one campaign at a time. And as an organized social movement, we've done a lot of stuff, not only the Syria bombing of 2013. We stopped the privatization of the internet. In Congress, when that was like, resistance is futile, don't even try it, we stopped it. When it was the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, remember they were going to change the rules, and we actually got the FCC to back off. We have postponed the Trans-Pacific Partnership month after month after month, forced it into an election season when even Hillary Clinton was forced to take a position against it. So my point is that when we mobilize, we can truly take charge here because we have the numbers. And we don't just ask on bended knee, we ask with a political threat. Without a political threat, we are powerless. In the words of the famous abolitionist, Frederick Douglass, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. Once we lost our independent third parties, they joined the New Deal coalition and became part of the Democratic Party. And then there was also the McCarthyism era that really demonized and intimidated third parties. So the U.S. wiped out third parties pretty much in the early 1900s.
Still people in prison from those days.
Incredible.
It is just for being dissident.
Yeah.
Nothing else. In our country.
And these days are
in our
coming.
country. Just to be clear on that, it's crazy.
Yeah, it so is, and these days are coming again. So the point being that we need third parties. Third parties are a good. If you are worried about dividing the vote, guess what? That can be solved with the flick of a pen with a policy called ranked choice voting. It means you rank your choices when you go to the polls. You don't have to just vote for one person. There are many cities across the U.S. from San Francisco to Oakland, the Twin Cities, Portland, Maine, cities all across the country that are using this system now. In Maine, they're actually running it as a voter referendum to bring it to statewide elections, and there are countries around the world that use it. This is a win-win. It means that if your first choice loses, your vote is automatically reassigned to your second choice. So this is a great system. Why are we not using it? Because the parties in power rely on fear, and they need to scare their base about somebody terrible in order to maintain their vote. In order to corral their votes back into the party, they need fear. If they need fear, what does that tell you? If they need fear, that tells you that they don't really have what it takes to earn our votes. We can fix this. Just want that to be clear. People think we're powerless. And this can be passed, by the way, in state legislatures right now before the 2016 vote. If they were really concerned about this,
and they really wanted to bring about change,
they could do that. My campaign, the first time I was tricked into running for office in 2002.
You should tell that story again. That is a good story.
The first time I was tricked into running for office, there were a couple of very revealing things there, but one of them, was that we filed this bill at the outset with a progressive Democratic legislator. We filed the bill to implement ranked choice voting so that there would be no dividing of the vote. No one would shed tears about how, they didn't want so-and-so to get elected and blame that on us. We filed the bill so that could be prevented. Of course, that bill never got out of committee. It's been refiled many times. 16 years later, it's still, is trapped in committee because that bill is very threatening to the stranglehold that the Democratic Party has on power, and likewise to the Republicans.
Right. Economics.
Yeah.
I know that you have a long plan, a long-range plan, a short-range plan for economics. Talk a little bit about that.
So we have an economic emergency. Average workers are barely making above the poverty level right now, and there are millions upon millions of people who don't have jobs, who are not even reflected in the unemployment statistics because they've given up, so they don't get counted. And the jobs that have come back are really lousy jobs, so people are struggling. In fact, much of what motivates Donald Trump's rise is the desperation of white workers who have really been thrown under the bus right now, and their death rates are skyrocketing now, and depression and drug use and alcohol, sort of self-destructive behaviors have really gone through the roof because they're being stressed to the hilt right now. Where did this come from? This came from policies of Clinton, shall I say? So Clinton is not the solution to Trump.
It's not Clinton, it's Slick Willie.
Well, right, but who was Willie's cheerleader,
Yes.
and who's taking credit for Willie's so-called accomplishments, So she, the two of them are a partnership, and Hillary has promised that she will bring Bill back to, create the jobs. So what we are calling for is basically, let's be honest, this is an emergency. This is an economic emergency for most people. Likewise, it's a climate emergency. We got to fix them both, and the good news is we can. So we're calling for a Green New Deal, like the New Deal that got us out of the Great Depression, but in this case, a green one as well to address the climate emergency. We're calling for 20 million good wage jobs so that everyone who wants to work and is capable of working has a job. These jobs are focused on greening our energy, our food, our transportation, and restoring critical infrastructure, including our ecosystems, so that we have healthy rivers and waterways and water systems and forests and a climate, and things like that. So that's where our jobs go. We reach 100% clean renewable energy by 2030, which is what we need to do if we're going to get out of here alive. And we call for an immediate ban on all new fossil fuel infrastructure. So we really jumpstart this, and we make it happen. And this goes hand in hand with bailing out the students, because we will need them to be the advocates to move this through Congress. What this deal does, by the way, is revive our economy, turn the tide on climate change, and it makes the friggin' wars for oil obsolete. Because if you have full 100% renewable energy here, you don't need 1,000 bases all around the world in over 100 countries in order to basically safeguard fossil fuel supplies and their routes of transportation. And what's really going on in Syria? Syria is a proxy war over who gets to run their pipeline through Syria in order to reach Western Europe.
And we can't just say that we need to get into that.
Oh, we do.
So we can come back around to that, because that is a huge, unknown, untalked about issue that is 100% true. I'm so glad you brought it up. Finish your economics.
Yes, so the thing that really seals the deal on this plan, okay, good for the economy and workers, fixes our climate and environmental problems, and it makes the wars for oil obsolete. So how does it pay for itself? I mean, it pays for itself, because when you downsize the military, which we spend $1 trillion a year on making ourselves less secure, not more secure, we can put those hundreds of billions of dollars back into this job creation. But it also turns out that doing the right thing on the climate and for our economy turns out to be really great for our health, because a healthy, local, sustainable, nutritious food system where we're subsidizing the small, local, healthy farmers rather than agribusiness, which makes us sick in all kinds of ways and destroys the environment, and it's extremely inhumane and cruel to animals. It turns out if you're mistreating animals, you're actually making them very unhealthy for humans to consume, and that has to do with the way their nutrition changes when they are confined and overfed grain, which gets into the weeds of nutrition that we won't have to go into. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of a nutrition wonk, so we won't go there.
You're a doctor, after all.
That's right, yes. So I have looked into these things carefully and discovered that what's bad for the animals and actually really bad for the environment, not to mention that you're loading them up with antibiotics and hormones and things like that, which are not good for people. It's not good for people, you know. Right. But there is a very healthy food system that is also the sustainable food system, which makes fresh fruit and vegetables, which is what most people can't afford now. They're too expensive. That's where our subsidies need to go, instead of this industrial food, which is making us sick. When you clean up the pollution and going to 100%, renewables, you don't have the pollution in the air and in the water and in the food chain, et cetera, anymore. We get so much healthier from just ending the pollution alone, let alone changing our food system. Just from the pollution alone, we get so much healthier. Less asthma, less heart attacks, less strokes, and less cancer, because the pollutants are a big driver of the cancer epidemic too. We get so much healthier that the reduction in our health expenditures alone is enough to pay for the energy transition. So this pays for itself through health benefits, and it pays for itself by basically downsizing the bloated, dangerous military budget.
Fantastic. So we need to go into foreign policy. I know Medea will not forgive us if we do not.
Yes.
We need, and so many of our little anti-war friends. We're a mess, obviously. The 1,000 bases that you mentioned, the empire, the sun never sets on the empire. But you mentioned Syria, and so let's start there. Tell the audience what's really going on in Syria.
Well, Syria is a complex situation. Shall we say the Middle East is extremely screwed up. And that has an awful lot to do with the U.S. presence, U.S. and other foreign powers, but particularly the U.S., and our support for dictatorships and extremely repressive and anti-human rights violators governments like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, yes.
United Arab Emirates.
Exactly, like Israel. Yes.
So we said that out loud, everybody. I want you to hear that. I'm
right.
not anti-Semitic. I'm anti-Israel government. Let me be clear on that.
Yes, likewise. Right. I can say that.
There's a major difference.
As a Jew, born and bred,
Imagine that.
I can actually say that this is horrible. This is horrible for everybody, including for Jews around the world who are associated with this militaristic war criminal, Netanyahu, who, by the way, his biggest supporter is Sheldon Adelson, who's now supporting Donald Trump. So, so what are we looking at here? We're looking at a global elite, a predatory global elite. And if I were to say in a nutshell what's going on with U.S. foreign policy here, it's that it is a marketing strategy for the war profiteers, who are the only ones who are making out like bandits here. Basically, the U.S. has taken a flamethrower and applied it to the Middle East, and we see that in Syria. We are arming all sides to the conflict, essentially. $100 billion worth of weapons sold to Saudi Arabia in approximately the last 10 years, slightly under $100 billion, but that's pretty bad. And what do the Saudis do to it? The Saudis are not the solution here. The Saudis have been the problem, along with the U.S. And if I could go back to, first base here, the whole jihadi enterprise was launched by the CIA and Saudi Arabia in Afghanistan.
Saint Reagan.
Yeah.
I have nicknames. Just
yes.
Go with me.
Yes.
Saint Reagan.
Yes, thank you. But continued to, pursued after Reagan as well, and Bill Clinton and Barack Obama have, and George Bush.
Everybody's enjoyed that ride.
Exactly, and it went from the Mujahideen. And basically what they were doing was creating resistance to the Soviet Union and Afghanistan. This was about competing for Afghanistan's resources. So, we have this policy of adopting warlords and very unsavory groups. Some of those groups may be freedom fighters, but, they mingle freely among themselves. So you got the good terrorists, the bad terrorists, the warlords, and the freedom fighters, and they're not card-carrying members of organizations who are following, particular rules of the game. They're constantly mixing and matching. So you don't want to be in the position of just supplying them weapons and training and religious training, which is what the Saudis have been doing through their madrasas. They have been basically, spreading Wahhabism, which is the essence of Sunni jihad in all of its forms. That was recognized by Hillary Clinton herself in a State Department memo that got leaked by our friend Julian Assange, the patriot that he is, who leaked that information where Hillary Clinton was saying long after 9/11 that the Saudis have not cleaned up their act, that the Saudis are still the major funder of Sunni terrorist groups world over. So we went from Afghanistan, where we strengthened the Taliban also as part of this resistance.
Sure.
And then we trained Osama bin Laden. We and the Saudis, this has been a partnership where we provide funding, we provide arms, and we provide training between us and our allies.
Reagan compared them to the founding fathers.
Did he really? I hadn't heard that one.
Yeah, there's a very famous picture of him with a number of the Mogadishu and a number of people in the White House. And he compared them to the founding fathers.
Incredible.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible.
Wow. So we went from there to Al-Qaeda, and then from Al-Qaeda we went to ISIS, and with each turn of the wheel, the cycle of violence becomes more terrible and more, horrific. We have pulled out all the stops already. We already went to the mat in money, in troops, in armaments. We've done the violence thing, and it only creates more violence. What we need is a peace offensive here. And in Syria, you have all these elements fighting for basically a pipeline pathway. You have essentially Russia competing with the Gulf states, basically, and the various allies.
This is important. The Syria essentially, and Iran, refused to capitulate to the West as to where they wanted the pipelines to go. And a lot of people, this never gets discussed, certainly by media. And certainly not by our elected officials. They don't come out and say, well, we're going to have a press conference today, we're going to educate the public on what's going on with the pipeline situation. They essentially said, we're not going to do that. We're going to run it this way.
Yes.
And here we are. We're funding. It was interesting.
Right.
You probably saw a couple months ago where you're talking about arming all sides of the conflict, where they actually killed each other. The two sides that the CIA gave weapons to this side, the Department of Defense gave weapons to this side,
really?
and they were in a conflict against each other and were killing each other. Yeah, it was.
Send me the link.
I will, absolutely. Actually, The Guardian was the one that really? Exposed it at first.
Okay,
it was very informative, and it's
there have
amazing.
been repeated exposés and investigative reports, even by the New York Times, that clarify the role of the CIA in helping to ship weapons or shipping weapons of our own, and then a lot of it is top secret and classified, but even what we know is extremely damning. So with one hand, we are fighting terrorism with all we've got, with thousands, tens of thousands of troops who've been killed and maimed, 1 million people killed in Iraq alone, which is not winning us the hearts and minds of people, human beings around the world, and $6 trillion, $75,000 per household.
Right.
And what do we have to show? Failed states, mass refugee migrations, which are tearing apart the Middle East and Europe, and worse terrorist threats. So we're going to do more of the same? Right. It's like, what's wrong with this picture?
What's they want to expand it. If you think about it, you're looking at they want to expand it. It's crazy.
And who is this serving? This is serving only the weapons industry. They are the winner here because they are calling the shots, because they move through the revolving door, they get appointed.
Both of the major parties want to do that. We're not even talking.
Both of them,
we're not even talking about a difference when it comes to foreign policy. And these are things the executive gets to control more so than Congress does.
Exactly.
And both parties and Congress also want to expand this stuff.
And even Bernie, while he has moved a little bit over the course of the campaign, he's still saying, let the Saudis do our dirty work for us. That is the problem. They are already doing the dirty work for us. He also came out in support of the assassination. He also came out in support of the drone assassination program, which is also amazing. Yes. This is why, a revolution is not going to happen inside of the Democratic Party, because at the end of the day, it's the war profiteers who are funding it, like the Republican Party. So what we are calling for is a peace offensive, unlike the war offensive, which has been so disastrous, successful in creating more war. We need actually a peace offensive, which means a weapons embargo, which we can lead because we are supplying most of the weapons, but we can bring the Russians in on this too, and the Iranians, because they are struggling with this crisis as well. They would benefit from stabilizing the situation. We can lead the way, and we need an embargo on the bank accounts of our allies who continue to follow our lead in the past, but not under a Green administration. They need to follow our lead and be put on notice that when we turn the White House into a greenhouse, we are going to freeze that funding of any country which is continuing to do what the U.S. was doing, which is, to fund terrorism in all of its forms.
I always thought it was interesting. When Jimmy Carter was president, he put, a lot of people don't know this, particularly the millennials, when Jimmy Carter was president, he put solar power in the White House. Mm-hmm. And when Ronald Reagan became president, he took it down. Mm-hmm. And it was almost like an attitude, well, we don't have to capitulate, we can get anything we want. And ideally, by putting the solar panels down there, it really sent a message to the world that we were going to lead. Mm-hmm. Because we're talking, this is 1976. That's a long time ago, everybody. Mm-hmm. And we could have been 40 years into something that has been around. Yes. And we've wasted our time, and we've gone through these vicious cycles. It's unfortunate.
And I like the use of the word here, leadership.
Yeah. Because
we have been leading, the race to the bottom here in every way. We could be leading the race to the top. We could be leading the high road to a world that works for all of us. Yeah. We are all being sabotaged right now by the massive military-industrial complex. It's not just the people of America, it's the people of Russia and the people of China. All of these countries are extremely stressed by the cost of militarism right now, as well as by the climate. And Russia has had, a major wipeout of their grain supply, major forest fires going on. China, has the horrific pollution problem and incredible flooding in their rivers, horrific weather. Right. So everybody is seeing the writing on the wall right now on climate. And it turns out that if we just redirected our resources, turned our warheads into windmills, so to speak, we could all do this together. And eliminate at the very outset the whole reason for our fighting in the first place.
Right.
We can render the cause of war obsolete by solving our climate crisis that is a terminal threat to us all now. And I have to mention in here the fact that our wonderful democratic rulers, misleaders, have committed us to a $1 trillion program now to renovate a whole new generation of nuclear weapons and modes of delivery.
Yeah.
How much good is that going to do us? We are basically ensuring our pathway to what's called assured mutual destruction. And this is triggering another nuclear arms race. Fortunately, Russia has been restrained up until now. We have been encircling Russia with the Cuban Missile Crisis on steroids.
Well, it's the same thing with Iran. They talk about the threat of Iran, and we have how many bases that are sitting right around the border. It's amazing.
Exactly.
And it's not talked about by the media.
We promised, and it was James Baker, I believe, in the era of Reagan, who promised we would not move 1 inch to the east of Germany at the time that we said, okay, let's reunify Germany and bring them into NATO. NATO is not going to move because the counterweight to NATO, the Warsaw Pact, was dissolved.
Right.
So you didn't need NATO anymore.
Right.
NATO is NATO is a very explosive little thing that the U.S. uses when we can't get the UN to sanction our wars. We just say, okay, we'll bring it to NATO, and NATO will do it. So NATO is a real problem here that needs to be constrained. We need to go back to the drawing
boards. And that's important what you say, the distinction, because of the Warsaw Pact. You don't have the wall anymore. You don't have the Eastern Bloc. That was the whole point. It was the balance.
Right.
It was a militaristic political balance that was existing in order to make sure one party doesn't advance the other way. Right, wrong, or indifferent.
We are creating big enemies because you can't justify these massive weapons systems with terrorists with a shoulder-mounted
and living in caves.
Rifle.
Right.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, we've been in Afghanistan 14 years fighting people with pea shooters living in caves. Meanwhile, we have this ridiculously monstrous military machine that we don't turn loose. Not that I want us to turn that loose, but we're not fighting the wars the way we actually can. And then we're creating military victims in order to keep the narrative of supporting the troops, etc. Exactly. It really is absurd. I agree.
That's right, and we're creating enemies here in the form of Russia and China. We are provoking them both. Not that we don't have some issues with them, and human rights issues in particular in Russia and China for that matter. But let's sit down as adults here, not schoolyard bullies, and try to dominate our way.
How about if we earn the Nobel Peace Prize instead of getting it as a prediction? How about that?
Oh my God, yes.
Imagine that.
Right. I mean, this president should be getting the Nobel War Prize, not the Nobel Peace Prize, unfortunately. That's a real... It's a shame. It puts to shame the whole concept of a Nobel Peace Prize. But we can solve the war problem. We can solve the war with a peace offensive. And in the course of doing that, we can lead the way to a global demilitarization and to a global green economy, which is what we all need. A war, a warlike mentality and a culture of war is an immediate threat to our survival. The climate crisis is an immediate threat to our survival. We can render them both obsolete by moving forward with a global Green New Deal and a foreign policy based on international law, human rights, and diplomacy.
Let's change it up for a second. Earlier we were talking about, before we got started, I mentioned to you that I'm working with a new organization called the Tax Revolution Institute. We're an IRS watchdog, educating the public on what goes on in the massive 70,000 pages of our tax code. And we were working on that this weekend. We were both at the Left Forum. We had a panel talking about, for example, the impact of the Affordable Care Act on low-income taxpayers. And which your response knows you know. But we were talking a little bit. We wanted to let you know something that was going on that you're going to take a look into. But I wanted to get your initial thoughts on what the IRS is doing in attacking the free speech of nonprofits. and how you think that should be, I guess would be the right way to do it. Because I know that you haven't investigated it enough to give an official position, but I know that your reaction to it was kind of what we were expecting, actually, when you heard about it. Because you just mentioned you were at a protest this morning. So talk a little bit about the free speech.
Well, free speech is under assault here in this country. You know, I was at a picket line supporting the Verizon workers who are striking because they are being targeted as one of the last strongholds of decent work, you know, of work that could have a shot at being middle class. They're being attacked for being, you know, for defending decent wages and for defending their health care benefits and, you know, and dignity on the job. They're being outsourced, and they're also being subjected to this crazy work schedule that requires them to work all hours of day and night and to be moved around like little widgets on a chessboard, you know, and to take assignments far away from their families for long periods of time. You know, so they're standing up for basic dignity for workers. So I was there to support them. They are inside of a pen. You know, we have free speech pens all over the place. So if we have to be penned in order to have free speech, what's going on outside of those free speech zones? I mean, that just says that we are living in a zone of oppression, of violation of our First Amendment rights to free speech. So this is outrageous. And let me just comment on, you know, this IRS, you know, and nonprofit stuff. The real problem here is that so-called charitable groups are making outrageous claims of being nonprofits when they are thinly veiled shells of profiteering corporate predators. You know, you shouldn't have the Koch brothers in the business of having a disinterested nonprofit that they can funnel, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars into. You know, this is outrageous.
But at the same time, educating the public nonprofits.
Yeah, right, so they should not be incriminated because nonprofit status has been bastardized inside of the IRS. We should fix that problem not by slapping a muzzle on nonprofits. And I have to say the nonprofits are muzzled enough as it is because it tends to be large foundations that are funding very safe things that don't actually rock the boat. So our nonprofits have been really hobbled to start with. Chris Hedges, in one of his books, you know, talks about, you know, the foundations of democracy that have been bought out from under us. And one of them is the whole institution of nonprofits that have been really hobbled by their big corporate funding now. Or shall we say foundation funding. So it's not corporate, it's foundation funding, but it still tends to come from powerful hands who don't want to rock the boat.
Right.
So we need to get back to, you know, to nonprofits that are truly in the public interest and that are fully unmuzzled. You don't want to be in the business of muzzling nonprofits now. The problem here that they're trying to fix should not be fixed by silencing nonprofits and the public. It should be fixed by changing how the IRS treats these false nonprofits, these shell organizations that are funneling big corporate money and controlling our political system. That's how they should fix it.
Fantastic. Next subject that is near and dear to my heart, personally, is prohibition. Medical marijuana, hemp, industrial hemp. Well, prohibition in general, first of all. I am anti-prohibition, personally speaking. And when I put them in order, pecking order, medical marijuana, of course, goes to the top, industrial hemp for the other reasons. And that also goes back to the green policies that need to be implemented. People have no idea the greatness of industrial hemp because the media doesn't talk about it. You know, the nonprofits get silenced, or the IRS wants to silence them about it. And then, of course, overall, when you talk about the massive prison industrial complex and the damage it's done to the minorities, and the fact that we have 25% of the world's incarcerated and 5% of the world's population. Talk a little bit about that.
I mean, you just said it all. All these dots are connected here.
Yeah.
So let me start with prohibition, because it's really central to everything else you just mentioned. Marijuana is dangerous because it's illegal. Okay?
It's amazing how that works.
Yeah.
I'm glad you cleared that up. Appreciate that.
And I can say that as a medical doctor, marijuana has many therapeutic benefits. Like any substance, it potentially has some downsides when overused or if used by pregnant women and so on. Kids, not a good idea in general. But, marijuana, by making it illegal instead of having it legal and regulated and taxed, by making it illegal, you create a horrendous health and safety problem in the form of the illegal underground drug economy. Marijuana is the workhorse for the whole illegal underground drug economy. And that's about people getting shot in the street. It's about gang violence. It's about just horrific crime like existed during the era of alcohol prohibition. And it went away when alcohol was legalized. We need to do the same thing for marijuana. And we need to use science here, I think, in deciding what substances will be scheduled and which ones will not. And if I were sitting in the White House, another first thing I would do, because it's very quick and easy, is to simply instruct the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, to do a really radical thing, and that would be to use science in deciding what substances are scheduled and which ones are not.
Does this include reviewing the fact that the United States government has 2 patents for cannabinoid use as medically? Just throwing that out there. Since you said it's one of your first things, I want to make sure we cover this properly.
So tell me about this patent. I don't know about this
You
patent.
don't? Oh, well, the United States holds 2 patents on endocannabinoid as a medical use.
Oh.
Yeah, the illegal stuff. Because once they decide it's not illegal anymore, they want to make sure they have the patent on them, I guess. I'm really not sure. And I don't know how much you know about this part of it, but when Richard Nixon was president, he created a study group. And they actually told, when they were doing this drug war and doing the scheduling and stuff, and he was told not to make marijuana illegal. And we now have been told, because of leaked documents, that in fact, the reason that they did make it illegal was to stop the hippie descent and to go after the minorities.
Yes.
And you can go all the way back to the 40s where they used to run commercials where they would say, if marijuana was legal, then black people would be whistling at white women walking down the streets. Literally would say that in advertising. It's the history of this is crazy. And then you go into the industrial hemp side, which is the next side, and the science part of it is good. But industrial hemp, the DEA actually has come on record and said the reason that it needs to be illegal is because we can't tell the difference between the 2 plants. So I think the science aspect might help.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, there's no
Just a little
reason
bit.
to make marijuana illegal, and there's no reason to make hemp illegal. And so the difference between them becomes kind of irrelevant.
Right.
Who cares? They should both be legal. And hemp has unlimited economic potential, not only economic, but energy, nutrition, health, etc. Manufacturing. There's just a world of jobs to be created and whole local economies to be created. It's a wonderful thing, and it needs to be liberated. So this is another reason why we need transformational change. So it then connects to the whole war on drugs, and not only the incarceration nation that we have become. And by the way, we would call for not only legalizing marijuana, but pardoning and discharging from our jails all the nonviolent drug users who should not be locked up in the first place.
It is such a big deal.
It's
It is such a big
crime.
deal. And it so needs to happen. They were talking recently about, it's interesting that you mentioned that, the Clemency Project, which does some good work, has been working really hard to try and get more people pardoned. They were actually talking about how happy he was that, Barry had released some more people. But when you look at the amount of people that are incarcerated, half of our incarcerated are for nonviolent drug offenses, which is just absurd. And of course, the addiction problems don't exist with marijuana like the others, and it's irrelevant. We know that these things are alcohol is legal it's almost like an absurd discussion, and it's a really unfortunate. And here we are in 2016 having it.
It's incredible, and it's even bigger, than the U.S. incarceration crisis. It's also very much a part of the chaos and violence in south of the border, in Mexico in particular. 100,000 people have been killed in the last 5 years alone, related to the drug war. And what so many people are fleeing, U.S. policies create refugees. Our drug policies, NAFTA, and U.S. invasions, CIA coups, and U.S. trained death squads, overturn democracies, create violence. The drug wars are part of that violence. That is what people are refugees from in coming here. And then we criminalize them when they get here, and we send them back to near certain, danger and
Latin America doesn't get talked about a lot except in the aspect of immigration. But we have our hands in Latin America as much as we have our hands in the Middle East. It's just not. It's just they don't talk about it.
We sure do. And Puerto Rico, should certainly be extended. The benefits of a U.S. state or nation. We have certainly been exploiting the guts out of Puerto Rico for centuries, and it's about time, that we bail out Puerto Rico and get U.S. corporations out of the business of colonializing Puerto Rico.
Well, Dr. Jill Stein, really appreciate you coming by.
Great.
Certainly, a lot of people are going to get a lot of enjoyment about hearing you speak so candidly, as always. We always look forward to seeing you on the campaign trail and speaking with you again. And good luck with your campaign. You are my favorite candidate.
Oh, well, thank you. You're one of my favorite free press, real press corps out there. There's no better way I'd rather spend my Monday morning than talking with you, Robbie.
Thank you so
Anytime.
much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.